Thank you. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Subcommittee on International Development, International Organizations, and Global Corporate Social Impact will come to order. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today for this hearing entitled Shifting the Power, Advancing Locally Led Development and Partner Diversification in U.S. Development Programs. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any point, and all members will have 5 days to submit statements, extraneous material, and questions for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. To insert something into the record, please have your staff email the document to the previously mentioned address or contact subcommittee staff. As a reminder to members joining remotely, please keep your video function on at all times, even when you're not recognized by the Chair. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves, and please remember to mute yourself after you finish speaking. Consistent with HRES 8 and the accompanying regulations, staff will only mute members and witnesses as appropriate when they are not under recognition to eliminate background noise. I also ask members who are present in the hearing room to keep their masks on when they're not speaking. I see that we have a quorum and will now recognize myself for opening remarks. Pursuant to notice, we're holding a hearing today on the role locally led development plays in the United States international development efforts. Experience across multiple administrations, both Democrat and Republican, has found that locally led development has numerous benefits, including on sustainability and effectiveness. Each of the last 4 administrations has prioritized locally led development in one way or another, through reforms at USAID and at multilateral institutions in the Bush administration, the USAID Forward policy of the Obama administration, and the Journey to Self-Reliance framework in the last administration. The Biden administration has stated their intention to redouble these efforts and is undergoing a review to establish policy positions. In her confirmation hearing, USAID's administrator, Power, argued that locally led development is, quote, most effective development, unquote. She's returned to this theme in countless speeches since, including when she testified before this committee. The administrator has also signaled to the USAID staff that this is a top priority, but we're still waiting for the results from this review. There are a few questions this hearing will be looking to answer for the members of the subcommittee. The first is to really discuss what we're trying to accomplish by pursuing locally led development. Evidence demonstrates that working with local partners improves the sustainability and effectiveness of our foreign assistance programs. Local partners have a stake in their communities, are part of local governance mechanisms that can create long-term change and can be less susceptible to disruptions. Locally led development can also be more cost-effective and lead to more equitable outcomes. The second is to answer the question, what do we mean when we say, quote, locally led development, unquote? This is a basic, fundamental question which has different answers depending on who you ask. One consequence of multiple administrations pursuing locally led development in slightly different ways is the different interpretation of what it means within our own government. One outcome of USAID's review of its policies I'll be looking for is a unified approach across foreign assistance, one that ideally prioritizes indigenous organizations that are independent from international NGOs or even U.S.-based corporations. This hearing also merits some discussion of the impediments to pursuing locally led development and what Congress can do to overcome them. These efforts will require USAID to change how it operates. Working with new local partners is worth it, but will take extra effort. We know that USAID's contracting officers already have large caseloads and often do not have the time to experiment or try new things. Fortunately, the Biden administration's budget request and the House of Representatives' planned appropriations would increase the size of USAID's staff. It's essential that this legislation is signed into law as quickly as possible. We also know that reporting and compliance requirements can pose challenges for local partners and smaller organizations to work with USAID. U.S.-based and international assistance organizations build large administrative staffs and hire former USAID officials to ensure they write proposals that will appeal to the agency, as well as meet every compliance requirement. But that's not practical for small and locally led organizations. When we talk about building local partner capacity, we can't define that as making these local organizations more like big U.S. organizations in terms of their administrative capacity. Instead, we need creative solutions to meet new partners on their own terms, while also ensuring, of course, they're good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Ideas like expanding the use and thresholds of firm fixed price contracts, development innovation ventures, and other innovative tools can reduce compliance burdens, but more needs to be done. Of course, this is a two-way street, and Congress needs to do its part. USAID too often takes a risk-averse approach because they fear congressional blowback in response to critical GAO and Inspector General reports. Congress needs to be nuanced in oversight and signal to the agency that we understand there are different kinds of risks when dealing with new and local organizations, but we believe the benefits far outweigh those risks. We will discuss all of this and more with our distinguished panel today, but I want to emphasize that this is just the start of our efforts. We will continue to work on this issue in various ways, including through legislation. This will not be easy or quick, but I believe that it's essential. And before finishing, I want to thank Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs, the subcommittee's vice chair, for working with me on this hearing and for prioritizing this very issue in Congress. With that, I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Malliotakis for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Castro, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for agreeing to testify and share their experiences with us. As we all know, the concept of localization and development and U.S. foreign assistance is not new. President Bush sought to institutionalize better connectivity with local partners, particularly through the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief. The Obama administration carried this through as well and sought to build better country ownership of programs. And in the Trump administration, Administrator Mark Green established the New Partners Initiative to more effectively design programs alongside local partners and direct funding to new and underutilized partners. Subsequent administrations have recognized that until we meaningfully support local ownership of local challenges and build the capacity of local organizations to solve these problems themselves, our foreign assistance will not have lasting impact. It is the same concept here at home. Local solutions to challenges in our diverse communities across the country are more long-term and effective than any top-down solutions from Washington. In the same way, we must do a better job of consulting with and learning from our partners around the world and meet them where they are. This is especially important when considering some of the most pressing foreign policy challenges that require local solutions to local problems, like the root causes of migration from Central America and Caribbean. Just this week, I met with the ambassador of a Central American country who is very critical of this administration's open border policy and also expressed how funds provided through Usaid are not having the intended result of stemming the flow. Across Africa, where ISIS and al-Qaeda affiliates are gaining in strength and numbers, we need to listen to local actors who understand why terrorist recruitment is working and how to combat it. We also need better metrics and tracking to ensure, as we do with all U.S. foreign assistance dollars, that the money provided is used effectively and achieving results. And that means robust monitoring and evaluation and a willingness to stop funding when they are not working or ending up in the wrong hands. If we are to effectively rely on local community organizations to implement U.S. tax dollars, we must also work with these organizations to ensure financial systems and risk management strategies are in place to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm also interested to understand the role of the private sector. As the drivers of economic opportunity and jobs in the communities they work, private companies are central to spurring locally led economic growth and can and should play a major role in advancing community-led development priorities. Similarly, church networks and communities of faith in all parts of the world are also critical to any conversation about local ownership. Often the backbone of the community, we should continue to support faith-based organizations and their close ties with the communities where they work. As many have said before, the goal of our foreign assistance and development programs should be to put ourselves, Usaid, and the international development community out of a job. I look forward to the discussion today about how to better support local ownership of development programs and build the capacity of these organizations to advance the health, well-being, and prosperities of the communities they serve. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I'll now introduce our distinguished witnesses on our panel today. Our witnesses for today's hearing are first, Ms. Megan Armistead, who is the Senior Research and Policy Advisor at Catholic Relief Services, where she works on local leadership, localization, civil society, and aid reform. Ms. Deegan Ali has been the Executive Director of ADESO, a humanitarian organization active in Africa. Her insightful critiques of U.S. foreign assistance have kickstarted a necessary conversation on how we can do better in working with local partners. Mr. Ali Mohammed, who is the Program Director of GRADO, an organization that works in Somalia. He will contribute his experiences and discuss his experiences working with the United States and USAID on these issues. And Mr. C.D. Glynn, who is the Global Head of Philanthropy at PepsiCo and was previously the President and CEO of the U.S. African Development Foundation. The USADF is an important government agency that has a proven record on locally led development. I look forward to hearing from him his experiences in that role and in the role corporations like PepsiCo can play in this field. And I'll now recognize each of the witnesses for 5 minutes, and without objection, your prepared written statements will be made a part of the record. And before I call on our first witness, Ms. Armistead, I just want to remind the members and the witnesses, our witnesses are testifying virtually. You'll notice that there is a 5-minute counter. If you go to the grid view, you can see the counter that will give the 5 minutes for your testimony. And I would just ask everybody, please, as much as possible, to stay on track with that. And of course, to our members, if you can, as much as possible, try to keep your questioning within your 5 minutes so that we can stay on time today. If you go too far over, then I'll have to gavel you out. So please don't think me rude, but I want to keep us on time. All right? So Ms. Armistead, you're recognized now for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Castro, Ranking Member Maliotakis, on behalf of Catholic Relief Services, the International Relief and Development Agency of the Catholic community in the United States, thank you for calling this hearing and for the opportunity to highlight the need for the U.S. government to advance locally led humanitarian and development assistance. Supporting local leadership is core to CRS's foundation in Catholic social teaching, and in particular, its principle of subsidiarity, the idea that communities who are closest to challenges are best placed to address them. Supporting locally led development reflects this subsidiarity ideal and our commitment to respecting the dignity and agency of each person and community that we serve. Working with thousands of local organizations has taught us that partners embrace opportunities to lead, and CRS is committed to supporting their growth because it's the right thing to do and because it's the most effective, efficient, and sustainable way to do development.
Oh, you may be on mute there. Did you get muted, or did we lose the audio?
Am I okay? Can you hear me now?
Oh, you're back. Yeah.
Okay. How about picking up with our work with partners has shown us that a new way is possible. One example is our $40 million USAID-funded SMILE project in Nigeria, which successfully provided critical services to orphans and vulnerable children while also strengthening the capacity of 49 local service providers. In addition to hitting all of its programmatic targets, SMILE's partner agencies saw real improvement in their organizational performance, and 10 have now transitioned to become prime recipients of USG funding. SMILE proved to us that effective local organizations exist, and with investment can begin to take the helm for sustainable solutions. We also see this on the emergency side, where we have experiences like our PEER project, which worked with local faith-based institutions in India, Lebanon, and Indonesia. At the end of that project, all partners had measurable capacity improvements. More interestingly, though, in 2020, we returned to these partners to see how they were responding to the COVID emergency and found that all 22 continued to apply lessons learned from participating in PEER and found their improved systems helped enable an effective emergency response. These are just a few examples of many. In 20 years of working with civil society groups around the world, I can say that there are smart, capable leaders committed to advancing their communities. Listening, investing, and partnering with them and their institutions can make foreign assistance smarter, more cost-effective, and more impactful. Efforts to advance local leadership must be guided by a few core tenets. First, CRS believes that localization must go beyond program implementation to also include local ownership of development goal setting, prioritization, decisions, and strategies. Second, we know that holistic capacity strengthening underpins effective localization. Too often, local capacity is defined as the ability of organizations to comply with donor regulations. Real and enduring change happens when organizations own their capacity assessment and goals, and when investments are made in organizational systems and structures. Next, the business of aid may have to change too. Local capacity is important, but transformation also requires change in business processes on the funding side, including things like size and timelines of awards, mechanisms of procurement, flexibility in funding, and fair risk management. Finally, we stress the importance of supporting both a broad, inclusive civil society, including faith-based organizations, as well as local government in order to meet development goals. With these principles in mind and rooted in our values and experiences, we offer the following recommendations. 1, local means local. Define the goal clearly. Donors and programs have developed a range of definitions of local civil society and other entities. There are significant differences across these definitions, causing confusion and raising a number of concerns. For both the integrity of the efforts to support locally led development and for effective transparency in funding, it's critical to clearly define the goal and what local means in a way that reflects the intent to support autonomous local institutions who are accountable to their nations and the communities they serve. 2, if you don't measure it, it won't get done. Improve data collection and transparency. While some data is available on how much congressional funding goes to local and national entities, holistic data from the Department of State, USAID, and other US government donors is not available. We encourage Congress and the committee to urge the administration to provide better data on where resources go and include local entities as an implementing partner subcategory on foreignassistance.gov. 3, mechanisms matter. Fix funding vehicles to support localization success. Congress must ensure reasonable size and timelines of awards, align the choice of funding instrument with local actors' capacity, and embrace flexibility in funding and fair risk management practices. And lastly, 4, no shortcuts. Invest in holistic, not transactional capacity strengthening. We ask that donor agencies fully fund comprehensive holistic capacity strengthening approaches that ensure locally led goal setting and go beyond simple transactional one-off activities. To close, we thank you, Chairman Castro, and the committee for your leadership and attention to this important matter. The time is now to reflect and make much needed positive change to our foreign assistance. We look forward to working with you to making our foreign assistance dollars go further, do more, and ultimately support the dignity of every human person. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And I will now call on Ms. Ali for her testimony. Ms. Ali, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Castro, Ranking Member Maliatakis, and members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. ADESO is an organization based in Kenya that has long advocated for more locally led development and the need for the system to shift power to local organizations. ADESO has provided critical humanitarian and development assistance to millions of people in Somalia, Kenya, and South Sudan with the support of many donors, including USAID. There are 3 major reasons that I will elaborate on, and this is not comprehensive. There's many other good reasons why we need to do locally led development. And one is inefficiencies. Chairman Castro already spoke about that. There are layers and layers of intermediaries between USAID funding and local organizations in the form of UN agencies who then subcontract to an INGO, who then contracts a member of their INGO family. For instance, one member of the family, the US member of the family of these federations will give the funding to the international member of the federation or a European member of the federation, who then contracts to a local organization. These inefficiencies in the system are costly and mean that there's huge wastage of resources as organizations take a portion of the grant for their operational costs in each layer, ensuring that what reaches the communities has been reduced significantly. And this doesn't apply only to INGOs or American NGOs, but also contractors. Impact. If the projects and programs are being designed with no or limited engagement of local organizations and the communities that we're aiming to serve, who understand the context and what they need best, it means that USAID's funding is having less impact than desired. There have been countless projects funded by USAID and other donors that have wasted funds on infrastructure not being utilized by the communities or activities that have no lasting benefit. Third, fairness and issue of power. Imagine during Hurricane Katrina that organizations from France all of a sudden swooped in to respond to the crisis. They excluded American NGOs from local coordination meetings and even wanted all the meetings to be held in French and not English. They took over all decision-making forums, marginalizing the American Red Cross, other very small state level, county level charities, state authorities, and even FEMA. Well, this is the reality of what local organizations and national governments experience every day during a crisis in our countries. What would never be accepted in the US is commonplace treatment in Africa and Asia. So here are some recommendations for moving USAID's efforts on locally led development. Number one, the large awards and RFPs and RFAs only incentivize the agency to work with contractors and INGOs, as most local organizations don't have the capacity to submit a competitive bid nor manage an award of 75 million, 100 million, 45 million, and so on. Some of the reasons for the desire for large awards is because of capacity constraints and missions and DC to manage many smaller awards rather than one big award. Number two, require that all American and European partners of USAID have a 3-year exit strategy out of a country where they start off as a prime to a local partner, but transition to being subcontractors after 3 years. And the INGO provides only technical support to the local partner. Megan from CRS has already described some amazing examples from their projects. After 3 years, both humanitarian and development assistance should be led by the local organization or the local university or the government or the private sector, while the American or the European NGO or contractor has transitioned to becoming a subcontractor to a local partner. Number three, USAID needs to develop strong tracking tools of how much of its humanitarian development funding goes directly to partners. It should also provide incentives for the missions that increase their percentage of funding every year while simultaneously investing in institutional capacity strengthening of their partners. The missions that perform the best on various metrics should be rewarded and given public accolades and other ways of rewarding them. USAID, number four, USAID missions lack enough specialized personnel to support the capacity development of partners to manage many smaller local grants. The missions are often understaffed and overwhelmed. This is one of the reasons they don't want to manage multiple partners with small awards. Congress can support USAID and other development agencies engaging in more local partnership by supporting the staffing of those agencies. And lastly, to say that, there's already a great precedence with PEPFAR that has given, I think, over 40–50% of its funding to local organizations, USAIDF, and other US government institutions that are doing excellent on these metrics of supporting more locally led development. So the question needs to be asked is, why is it that some parts of the agencies and US government agencies are doing well while others aren't? And I think this is a question of both not just capacity, but also risk willingness on the part of USAID. And we need to provide as much support as we can to change the behavior and the attitudes of those who have, there's many in the institutions who are champions of locally led development, but there are many others who find it very risky and really find it a very scary concept. So we need to support those members of USAID who really need serious, strong capacity development on their part to understand the impact and the other benefits to locally led development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
Thank you, Ms. Ali. I'll now call on Mr. Mohammed for his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Castro, and also the rest of the committee. On behalf of Gredo, I believe a locally led development aid could work if the donors and the international agencies can fundamentally change the way they think and also adopting ideas of giving space to locally led initiatives. This means local communities set their own priorities and approaches, hence the NGOs can provide a technical backup on the know-how and the technical expertise. it will also locally be owned, where NGOs start an outsider, but then hand over the implementation to local NGO groups to create sense of ownership. But unfortunately, what we normally see is that aid is locally delivered, where NGOs get the funds and subcontracts a national NGO to do part of the project, which are called partnership agreement, while actually it is a delivery contract approach, which shouldn't be the case. Locally led initiatives could be effective and cost efficient. For instance, in Somalia, we piloted COVID-19 response project with Save the Children, which within 3 months have been benefited by almost 103,000 beneficiaries. This has been piloted and it was locally designed, and it came through the idea of a greater developing such a project in response to the COVID-19 response mitigation. And what this gave us is the leverage to absolutely be known by the project, which is also designed by the organization itself in a means that fits the community and the local context. Such pilot, the added value of a such pilot project, it's like it created pride within the organization in delivering solid developed project. It strengthened aid localization in the context of means to boost localization within Somalia, contextualized approach in delivering project among the community, created sense of honor within the community, especially in the engagement of various stakeholders. To be effective, locally led aid should be part of the bigger picture, and to achieve this, you need to context specific knowledge and the local people on ground willing to take the leadership and risks in the scenarios that we really need is to rethink what partnership really means in the current context of aid structure. It shouldn't be only or limited to outsourcing and subcontracting national NGOs for delivery of projects in their respective countries, and in this case, Somalia. It should be basis of local knowledge, initiatives, new ideas, and commitments to do better for the future. Donors and NGOs should get smart on how they help local NGO groups to scale up. True partnership should be based on respect, trust, and humility, while locally led aid and a true partnership with our NGOs will increase our preparedness, establishing more connection to the local communities at risk, and eventually increase aid effectiveness. True locally led development can happen, and it needs the willingness to trust and experiment locally driven approach and ideas. It's important that we reform the aid sector, putting local actors, in this case national NGOs, civil society, government institutions, and the local community at the center and giving a space to fully respond locally. Recommendation to USAID on locally led development. One, to diversify USAID partnership approach with the engagement of national NGOs, government institutions, the private sector, and the local community. Two, establish a suitable funding bracket for NGOs to apply directly at the country level, or maybe establishing a pool of funding to increase the quantity and quality of funds channeled to local actors. Invest more on national NGOs capacity strengthening and the system, and this should go beyond the basic in-house trainings and invest more in the organization system. Facilitate open and honest dialogue within all actors with regard to funding. Promote greater NGO sustainability through multi-annual funding or fundraising support and equitable overheads. Localization and working with first responders. Increase and support multi-year investment in the institutional capacity of local and national responders, including preparedness, response, and coordination. Back to you, Senator.
Thank you very much for that testimony. I now want to call on Mr. Glenn for his testimony. Mr. Glenn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Castro, Ranking Member Maliatosis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to appear before you today and to share my perspective on this important and timely global issue. With the rise of the global pandemic, organizations in almost every sector have had to rethink, reshape, and retool their ways of working. This is especially true in the international development sector. Fortunately, for decades, PepsiCo has built strategic local partnerships to ensure the provision of locally driven solutions, enabling us to continue to execute and monitor our programs even in the face of pandemic-induced challenges. PepsiCo has experience realizing the benefits of locally led development, both for the business and for our communities. As the largest food and beverage company in the country and one of the largest in the world, our foods and beverages are consumed nearly 1 billion times each day. While our reach is global, we remain committed to a multi-local approach, believing that it is our duty as a company to contribute to the prosperity of the communities where we operate by contributing to the GDP, creating jobs for the local population, contracting and sourcing from local suppliers, while connecting and engaging with local community and stakeholders. At the PepsiCo Foundation, our local approach and local strategic partnerships are key to the success and the sustainability of our work. We have hired and empowered local staff to co-create programs with local partners. The result of our inclusive, locally led approach has been the development of innovative solutions that build upon local insights. For example, in Peru, we've been working with small-scale women producers since 2019. The program with Care Peru was disrupted by the pandemic. Instead of hosting in-person trainings for small-scale women farmers, we worked together with them to pivot to a virtual approach, and in doing so, created an e-commerce vehicle for these small-scale women producers who now are able to advertise and sell their produce via WhatsApp. In Pakalad, India, frustrated community members had been independently trying to establish reliable infrastructure to access water. In consultation with WaterAid India and the People's Service Society of Pakalad, we established dialogue with community members and co-created a program combining local insights and ideas with the technical expertise needed to build a functional water system. Through this participatory approach, a new pipeline was installed, and local leaders now operate and maintain a system that provides water to nearly every home in the community. That said, PepsiCo's decades-long global to local footprint has also exposed us to the barriers, risks, and limitations of going local, including limited implementation capacity of local partners, inadequate accountability, transparency, and oversight systems, nascent monitoring, evaluation, and reporting expertise. Our experience with these barriers hasn't stopped our international efforts. Rather, they have informed our approach. For example, we engage third parties and grant intermediaries who play a fundamental role in helping prospective local nonprofits to meet our requirements. They vet new projects, assess organizational capacity, provide training, and monitor performance to ensure that locally led projects remain on track, on time, and on target, adapting where necessary. To truly scale localization efforts, USAID will play the central role. PepsiCo and USAID have a strong relationship. While we celebrate our successes together, there are opportunities for improvement. We offer 5 critical lessons and suggestions that could accelerate the progress on the quest to shifting power and prioritizing locally led development. 1, hire locally. 2, prioritize local co-ownership. 3, incentivize co-creation with the private sector. 4, modify monitoring and evaluation criteria to ensure mutual accountability. And 5, share local networks. In conclusion, this work is difficult. The barriers to locally led development are real and must be addressed thoughtfully. But we must prioritize progress over perfection. PepsiCo is committed to localization in our business and our philanthropic investments, and we are encouraged by the bipartisan commitment from Bush to Biden, administration to locally led development. While we celebrate the progress the global development community is making, including that of international NGOs who are creating local entities with all local staff and local governance structures. At PepsiCo, we are listening to and learning from our local partners to empower them to lead long-term solutions. While far from perfect, we are making progress, and PepsiCo is proud to play our part in advancing the thinking and the doing as we all seek to shift the power. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn, for your testimony, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony. And I'll now recognize members for 5 minutes each for questioning, and pursuant to House rules, all time yielded is for the purposes of questioning our witnesses. Because of the hybrid format of this hearing, I'll now recognize members by committee seniority, alternating between majority and minority. If you miss your turn, please let our staff know and we'll circle back to you. If you seek recognition, you must unmute your microphone and address the chair verbally. And I'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes of questions. As I mentioned in my opening statement, before we can embrace locally led development, we first need to come to an agreed upon definition of the term. And different parts of the U.S. government define the term differently. USAID is currently reviewing how it will define the term. And I believe it was Ms. Armistead, you spoke to this during your testimony. Can you elaborate on the different approaches the U.S. government takes and what a single definition would be?
Thank you so much. Sure. I think what we've seen in recent years is a proliferation of a range of definitions, and it's that differentiation that sometimes causes some confusion and concerns. We see local entities established in a number of ways in different places, whether that's in PEPFAR or in the recent USAID ADS or within NPI. And then we've also seen the introduction of this locally established category, which is, I think, aimed at recognizing this entity that is affiliated with perhaps international organizations but has a local presence. And I think what we really are urging the committee to do is to clarify what the goal is. And I think we have heard across the witnesses and across the statements that the goal is really to shift the power and have local actors owning the development process and leading. And if we're talking about that as the goal, I think we have to talk about local entities and define local entities in a way that reflects that local nature. So clarifying that we're talking about organizations that are part of the social fabric of the countries in which we are operating or talking about here with foreign assistance, and who are accountable to those communities. So I think that those lines, the autonomousness, the autonomy of the organizations, and the lines of accountability would be important lines to consider as we seek a common definition. I'd also like to add that coming to that common definition is important for the goal, but it's also important for just doing aid effectiveness well and increasing our transparency. A number of witnesses have talked about needing to have a better picture of where funding goes. And without a clear definition and a common definition, it's very hard to see that. So if we can come to a clear definition of what local entities is, that can help inform our efforts to really have a better picture and a more transparent system that shows how much of our foreign assistance is going to local institutions. I hope that's helpful.
No, thank you very much for that. And Mr. Glenn, you formerly led the U.S. Africa Development Foundation, which is a pioneer when it comes to locally led development. What lessons do you believe USAID can apply from USADF's model as the agency tries to do more locally led development?
Thank you, Chairman. I truly appreciate the question. And as you mentioned, I was president and CEO of U.S. African Development Foundation for approximately 5 years. And that model of development, along with that of the Inter-America Foundation, we feel like is exemplary to locally driven, locally led development. Some of the tenets of that is being demand driven and being demand responsive to the local needs and challenges. So not developing solutions to problems from afar, whether Washington, D.C. or writ large, but locally within the community. So being demand responsive, demand driven, looking at bottom up driven solutions, but also supporting those entities directly with direct support, grant support, but also having oversight by local organizations as well. We have a very ADF has a very cost-effective model because not only do they grant directly to grassroots enterprises and organizations, but they also leave it to local organizations to do some of the monitoring, evaluation, and support. And I want to appreciate the role that Congress led in creating and codifying USADF and the Inter-American Foundation by law. And in that codification mandated that we had to support local organizations and provide them that support directly and build their capacity with local entities. If that mandate wasn't there, we might see a model that is not as transformational as currently exists, where local organizations are enabled to build their own capacity, are enabled and supported not through implementers who are implementing programs for them, who really have to support and provide support with and through them, so that the entities are sustainable organizations, that they are long-serving, and that there actually is a pathway to prosperity. We talk about developing them, growing them, and scaling them so that they can take on some of the development challenges in their communities on their own. I think USAID could, at scale, take some of the tenets of USADF with local implementing partners, with direct support to organizations, and modify some of the current structures. But I will say that one solution is to scale up what is working. USAID and USADF consistently on an annual basis are somewhat under threat. And so by doubling down on those institutions to be complementary to USAID is also another way for the U.S. foreign assistance toolbox to really use some of the tools that are there, USADF
Thank
and
you
the
for
Inter-American
that.
Foundation.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. I'm over time, so I'm going to turn it over to our ranking member, Malliotakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Mr. Glenn. You know, we're at a time where there are many who attempt to vilify corporate America, and I think that there are a lot of things that we can point to in terms of how corporate America has helped fill in the gap where, you know, obviously we can't, it's not an endless stream of taxpayer money. We do rely on private sector partners to implement some types of programs, and you as the global head of philanthropy at PepsiCo, I would love for you to share some of the examples from your company's foundation, as well as perhaps others that you can give us from other private sector entities.
Thank you for the question. Yes, at PepsiCo and the PepsiCo Foundation, we see ourselves truly as a collaborator with others in development, whether those are communities where we live and work, or whether it's other actors who are trying to meet some of those community needs. So collaboration is key to all that we try to do at PepsiCo, collaborating with the communities. We're a true contributor, as I mentioned, whether that's directly creating, increasing GDP, creating jobs, sourcing locally, and impacting the community. At USADF, we work with others to solve some global challenges in a local context. And so our priorities evolve around access to food security, creating more equitable access to nutritious foods, safe water access, as well as economic opportunity. And we work with other private sector entities in collaboration, and we also work with community organizations to bring about those solutions. We see ourselves also as a catalyst to really, as you mentioned, using our corporate power and the power of business as a positive role in society to catalyze solutions, and to sometimes to go in earlier than maybe government and other entities want to, but to catalyze solutions to show what works and then have those scaled up by USAID and others. So I think that there are ways in which USAID and other corporations can also follow, quote unquote, some of the corporations lead in areas like food security and areas like water or economic opportunity. There's ways to align to corporations investing in communities, and then also USAID and government entities that are involved in development, creating a local operating environment, an ecosystem where it's easier not only to do business, but to do good. We look at our impact as really creating local community impact, as well as engaging our employees in these countries. We have somewhere hundreds of thousands of employees globally, and also where we as a company can be a better corporate citizen.
Mr. Glenn, could you give us like one or two specific examples that you are most proud of what your foundation has been able to accomplish?
In the areas of water is where we've had transformational impact, where we have a goal of impacting 100,000 people to provide safe water access to 2030 in countless areas around the world. With groups like WaterAid, we've been able to work on access, conservation, and distribution of safe water. We recently announced taking this water that's globally, that was in South America and in South India, to sub-Saharan Africa in areas of food security, partnering with even with USAID in West Bengal, India, working with smallholder farmers to help them develop new solutions to agronomical issues. In Egypt, we work directly with empowering women farmers in a program called She Feeds the World, where we really are helping engage women as the breadwinners of society to build their capacity. So in countless areas, the foundation comes together with local communities and with potentially other actors such as USAID to bring our corporate expertise, our convening power, and our resources to really amplify efforts of community-driven impact.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Our next call on the Congresswoman from San Diego, Sarah Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for convening this really important hearing about an issue that I know doesn't always seem sexy, kind of wonky and niche, but actually critical to getting our foreign aid right. In fiscal year 2020, only 5.6% of USAID funding went to local partners. And you know, the question is, why does this matter? Why is it important to fund local partners directly? And the answer is power. Because we talk a lot about improving development outcomes in countries, but we do so from an ivory tower, and we often task largely white organizations to carry out this work in other countries. And when they leave, the development outcomes, if they work to begin with, are no longer able to be sustained. We need to understand that people know what they need. They don't need us to tell them. They just need us to ensure access. And as a report from Peace Direct found, there remains a culture in the development field that oftentimes fails to recognize the strengths of local people and properly include those in the design of projects who understand the context best. I'm encouraged by Administrator Power's commitment to this issue, and I think this hearing is an important step in making sure the administration realizes their goal. So I wanted to ask our witnesses a question. The New Partners Initiative, established in 2019, streamlines USAID's partnering process to work with new and local partners, and the administration is seeking to update programs and strengthen partners. So, Ms. Armistead, I was wondering, in your view, how can USAID effectively build upon and improve this program to ensure that local communities, not just international organizations who hire local staff, are supported more effectively? And then Ms. Ali and Mr. Muhammad, could each of you describe the top 3 specific barriers your organizations have encountered when trying to work with USAID?
Thank you so much for all of those important points. And I think the New Partnerships Initiative is a great example of the increased interest in locally led development, and we're very enthused by that and encouraged as the US government is taking more of an interest and a recognition that locally led development is the right way to do foreign assistance. I think one question we have is, where does NPI fit within the larger ecosystem of US foreign assistance, and how can we integrate it into all the work that we do to support effective, efficient, and sustainable development, not just in a silo, but ensure that we're making efforts across the whole system, and within those efforts, always putting, as you say, local voices at the center. So looking holistically, also ensuring participation, so opening up new avenues for getting input from a range of voices as these new initiatives are designed and implemented is critical. I think looking at the definitions issue again is important, thinking about that, making sure that we are aligning initiatives such as MPI with the goal of effective locally led development is important. So I think those getting into the nitty gritty about how we're actually designing this is an important thing to do as we look forward, and looking to at the kind of the business of aid side of things. So ensuring that as we're looking at new ways and opening up new mechanisms for increasing access of local actors to lead development assistance programs, are we making sure that the business processes match those goals? So things like the size of those awards, the timelines of those awards, the risk management strategies of those awards. And I know we've talked, a number of witnesses have talked about this too, but those things matter in terms of how successful it will be as an initiative to support locally led leadership, locally
Thank
led
you.
development.
I'm just going to cut in so we can make sure Ms. Ali and Mr. Muhammad have time to answer before my time runs out.
Should I go ahead?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. So just 3 barriers. Well, I think the first one is that there is the rules and regulations are extremely vast and they're complex, not meaning that local organizations cannot meet those challenges, but they're extremely complex. And the advantage that American NGOs have is 60 years ahead of us, and they've developed these massive compliance departments. So unless we have a more shared approach to compliance, a more shared approach to risk, and we think about how we can reduce some of these compliance burdens and think about what is the most important issues that we really need to address in these compliance burdens, rather than just the array of issues that are constantly there. Many of the rules and regs, in my opinion, could be done away with, and they're just too cumbersome. Some of them are very important and really necessary. So I think there needs to be a real re-examination of the usefulness that a lot of these rules and regs are serving, and what that burden does to local organizations who are 60 years behind American NGOs and billions of dollars of investment behind. They've had all of that time and resources to invest in their capacity. The second thing I would say is that there isn't a very systematic onboarding process that happens for local organizations. It's individual specific, it's mission specific. Sometimes you're lucky enough to get someone that really understands what you need and support you in the process. Oftentimes you're kind of left on your own to figure this machinery and this maze out on your own. So there has to be a consistent process on that. And then lastly, I would say it's the attitude and the behavior. I think there has to be more recognition and more capacity development of the USAID staff themselves to be more risk sharing with the partners, rather than this very, I would say, racist attitude that if you're a local NGO, you're fraudulent, you're corrupt, and if you're an American NGO, we can trust you, which the data doesn't prove that. I'm sorry to say that the data doesn't prove that. There's just as much experiences and issues and problems with corruption or fraud or mismanagement of resources that happens with UN agencies, American NGOs, as it happens with local organizations.
Well, thank
so
you.
I think we really need to change the perspective of the staff in that end.
And I totally agree with you. I'm over time, so I will yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. All right, we're going to go now to Representative Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everybody for joining us today for this hearing, a very important one where we are focusing on shifting the power to local organizations and local actors in this space of foreign assistance and foreign aid. I have a couple of questions related to the pandemic. What have we learned or gained from this very difficult time in the world's history that we can apply to help accelerate the timelines of being able to direct local owners and actors to be able to be helpful in foreign, assistance? I know that Mr. Glynn, you mentioned something about technology being something that was deployed because of the pandemic. Are there other things that the speakers can give examples to or breathe life into that would be helpful in understanding how to accelerate timelines? And I'll start with Mr. Glynn, since you were the one who brought up the first example.
Great, thank you, Representative. I appreciate it. Good seeing you again. The pandemic has exacerbated some challenges, but also, as you said, brought about some positive solutions. So I think the one is just a sense of trust. We couldn't, quote unquote, the international community couldn't travel the way we were used to, so we had to rely on local capacity in ways that we had never been forced to do. And I think it's been proven successful with individuals showing real resilience, local actors having the ability to survive, adapt, and then thrive even in the face of the global pandemic. So I think it's really changed one of the things around credibility and familiarity, which are some of the barriers to why going local and using local organizations is sometimes challenging. So trust has been strengthened. I'd also say innovation, in that we had to come up with new solutions and doing things differently. And those solutions were typically driven locally, asking local actors, local providers, organizations, how might we? what can we do to improve? And so the power shifted where they were on the ground, and we needed to engage them in the solution because we weren't there, and we had to rely on their ability to adapt to the solution. So I think that innovation came, and as I mentioned, the use of digitization transformed a lot of how we deliver services, how we engage with those organizations, and it also really transformed the way in which we were able to see some locally driven innovation in new ways. I could go on, but let me stop there for sake of time. But I think trust and innovation are two things that we've learned that also can lead to improvements in how we not only work with organizations, but also how we manage programs and projects.
And perhaps Ms. Armistead, would you have anything to contribute to that?
Absolutely. I would say that we've seen our local partners around the world responding to the crisis in their communities in flexible, smart, sustainable, and effective ways. I think that our recent experience going back to partners that had previously received some capacity strengthening investment was a great example for us too of how local institutions exist with great ability to respond best to the needs of their communities. And with investment, you can see real lasting change in their ability to do that effectively. And especially, I think one other thing that we're curious about, though, is I think a lot of us felt that this was going to be the moment for localization. And I think what we're seeing is our partners are there, our partners are ready, and we're ready to support them. But perhaps the funding itself has not flowed in the way that we expected. So I think it's also a moment of reflection for us to think about, we have local institutions out there, they're ready to lead, they may need some investment to do so most effectively, but we know that it works. And we know that COVID was a moment when they were best placed in many cases to respond, but we are not seeing that the funding necessarily followed that. So I think it's a moment for examination, a moment for reflection, and a time to dig into seeing what are those enduring barriers and how can we help move beyond them.
Thanks. And with what's left of my time, I'd like to kind of dive into, I know the purpose of this hearing was about foreign assistance and foreign aid, but I'm also intrigued by the fact that we have Mr. Glynn here from industry, from the for-profit sector, and I was hoping to get reflections from each of you on the record, if we don't have time, on what the power is of business. Mr. Glynn, you mentioned the ability for business to do good. What kind of partnerships can you guys see from your NGOs and your NGO positions where you could engage in the power of people who are focusing more and more on environmental and social governance issues? Is there something that we can be doing as a government and as a Congress to be able to enable that relationship to be even stronger between the for-profit sector and the NGO or nonprofit sectors?
Definitely a place where we could provide greater insights and recommendations. But I would say, one of the things that we see government playing a strong role is being a sort of honest broker and bringing together companies and nonprofit partners and civil society leaders together in a way where we can have a shared understanding where one is not necessarily dominating the conversation. And so where we have in industry pre-competitive alliances, these are ways in where the power of the government to bring us together for a shared purpose where everyone can align their issues and the opportunities is one area where I think that there's greater a room for improvement. I think that there's also this opportunity of working directly with local organizations, and we're privileged. And the same was true at USADF. Having local staff in the countries really gives you the local insights to be able to really figure out what needs to be done, and listening and learning from them to be demand driven and demand responsive. And so using entities that have a strong ground game, such as corporations with employees who are finding funding and supporting local organizations, but also entities like USADF and IEF who have local staff who are trusted and true community connectors, listening to them and allowing them to sort of bring up some bottom-up driven solutions that we can then take forward to scale, whether through the private sector or through government. So I think that just the power of government to bring us together, but also to incentivize greater collaboration is a key area for greater exploration and an opportunity.
I know that I've run out of time, but if any of our other speakers would be willing to provide that information or some ideas later on, I really appreciate that. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And I want to give, as a follow-up, an opportunity for Mr. Mohammed to provide an answer to Ms. Jacobs' question about essentially, your experience with USAID or American NGOs and what you think needs to change or what could be improved.
Thank you, Chairman. I think one issue that we sort of would like to see change is the idea of partnership, in the sense that there has to be a mutually direct partnership with the local actors or entities on ground. A couple of times the barriers includes the sort of perception that there is no capacity. So the capacity in terms of responding the likes of pandemic, if there's a cholera outbreak or anything, but getting direct partnership, I think that's the main issue that needs to be focused, and also to be like acting a downstream at any point. So looking from the Usaid, I think they can look into the structure that are in place, facilitate the environment that allows NGOs or local actors to have an equal opportunity in terms of funding access. So local ideas or driven innovational creative mechanism could be implemented in a wider range and also with cost effectiveness. So I think the perception has to be changing on this structure, so nationals could have an equal opportunity in terms of
Thank you. Thank you for that. And next we'll go to Congresswoman Tenney. Congresswoman Tenney? I see you on the video, but I don't know if you can hear us. We'll come back to Congresswoman Tenney. I know that Congresswoman Houlihan had a few more questions.
I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
There?
Okay. Yeah, we'll go to Congresswoman Tenney.
Sorry about that. I was trying to get my thing here set up, but thank you. Thank you, Chairman Castro, for convening this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony as we look at these global development issues impacting our economy. And I'm going to direct my first question to Mr. Glenn. Could you tell me examples of success in assistance provision models that have proven effective in directing capital and capacity building support to non-government organizations and community leaders, if you could?
Thank you, Representative. One example that I'll cite is our work in Egypt. So in Egypt, for example, we source 100% locally sourced potatoes, providing opportunities for 4,000 farmers to work across 40,000 acres. So this is PepsiCo, the business, but we also work in collaboration with CARE Egypt, the local arm of CARE International, to ensure that as we are sourcing, that we're increasing the yields and incomes for smallholders, but also supporting for their families. So this is an example of using the power of business to engage local growers and the farming community, but also linking to a nonprofit that is operating locally, CARE International, to implement a program that not only provides a sourcing opportunity for us, but improves the lives and livelihoods of those growing the product, but also their families. And so PepsiCo with CARE, with our local partners, but also with the local communities. And so those partnerships, tripartite and the like, are really critical to our ability to serve as not only as a good corporate citizen, but a real community connector.
Okay, so on those, you're talking about those types of assistance. What type of grant structures can we use, like to help local partners improve their capabilities and manage the assistance? You think that this is the best model? You said a tripartite model. Can you just expand on that, how you mean and how we would see the U.S. funds spent that way?
No, great. So that is an approach where looking at the model of global development alliances, which are public-private partnerships, where USAID can come in, where PepsiCo comes in, and then we support, for example, another program that is in agriculture in West Bengal, where we have an MOU with USAID. PepsiCo is bringing funding, resources, capabilities on the ground. USAID is supporting a local implementing partner, and we're going in, quote unquote, aligned and together. There also are other models to really tackle the problem that we face with the capability and the accountability of local partners, and that's the US ADF model, which really has a tiered grant structure that really is about building the organizational capacity of the entity that you're eventually going to want to see run the program. So you're going in and building their capacity, and then you're expanding their ability to perform, and then eventually they are in a position to run the program on their own. So it's going in with a long-term sort of graduation model in mind. We think of it that elementary school prepares you for high school prepares you for college, and then you're out on your own. With these local organizations, sometimes we do need to go in and develop them, work with them to grow them, and then hopefully when they scale, they are able to absorb broader forms of capital from U.S. foreign assistance providers. So if we look at AID and other development assistance programs, there is a dovetailing and a linkage and a continuum where one U.S. foreign assistance provider can hand off organizations and can look at ways to grow the organizations for the long term. So collaboration.
Just quickly, because I want to ask Ms. Armistead a question. So when we get to that higher level, when you've developed them, we still maintain our oversight and ability to watch and look at where the funds are spent, correct?
100%, and it also leads to a difference in the relationship. It goes from not using international implementers to those international organizations really providing oversight and monitoring, which is less costly, which doesn't require the level of investment for using international organizations to implement programs. We then become more of a service provider, but they are the implementers. They own the solutions, and they own the sustainability of the interventions.
Great, thank you so much. Ms. Armistead, I just want to ask you a quick question. How can the U.S. government more effectively partner with some of the private foundations to utilize their pretty much vast local networks, their resources, and support some of the development solutions? Is that an option for us, similar to what Mr. Glenn just outlined?
Yes, thanks. I think that what we've seen is that partnerships among all development stakeholders can really be powerful in terms of bringing about a more locally led development landscape. Whether that's with U.S. foundations, we also do public-private partnerships, support public-private partnerships, as well as with local NGOs, local NGOs. I think for us, the key is investing in those partnerships, really understanding who the stakeholders are, what assets they can bring, and how we can invest in those partnerships to bring about the most optimal solution. So I think each one of these has a role to play. And I think investing in those trust-based, mutuality, transparent, equal partnerships can really be a powerful way to approach doing development better.
Thank you. I think I'm out of time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We'll go right back to Congresswoman Houlihan for a few more questions.
Thank you. Again, my question this time will be for Ms. Ali. Data shows that when women are empowered, communities are more prosperous, and the world is, of course, a more stable and peaceful place. And so working with more women-led organizations and focusing on women's economic empowerment, I believe, should be a priority of this body in the United States as we aim to take a more locally led approach. Has failing to sufficiently fund and empower NGOs led by women and other marginalized populations negatively impacted the effectiveness of our foreign assistance? And if so, are there some examples that you might be able to share with us?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Actually, that's a very good question, because this is one of the things I always talk about. Lack of locally led development doesn't just mean that it harms the ability to have impact and it's the right thing to do, but it actually harms women-led organizations. Why do I say that? I'll give you a very good example, Somalia. I'm a Somali American, and I've been living here now for about 20-something years. And majority of the strong quote-unquote strong organizations that most international NGOs and UN agencies partner up with are male-led, almost exclusively. There's very, very few real partnerships with women-led organizations. And why is that? Because the women-led organizations are oftentimes those small CBOs in country. They don't have access to these meetings in Nairobi. They can't fly out to Nairobi as easily. They don't have as much grasp of the English language. And they're very local in nature. They're not trying to become these big, they're not trying to mimic the international NGOs. And they want to stay local. So the policies and what we're doing is actually harming our ability to have a real partnership, meaningful partnership with those kinds of organizations. I'm always in a room of male-dominated Somali NGOs, and that's commonplace. And I wouldn't say that that's unusual also in Somalia. I'd probably say that's probably a global epidemic. Because the more professionalized you want the NGO to be, the bigger capacity they have, oftentimes the less grassroots they are, and they tend to be more male-dominated.
Thank you. Would any of our other speakers like to comment on that question?
I couldn't, thank you, Representative. I couldn't agree more with Ms. Ali. And I also want to highlight that PepsiCo and the PepsiCo Foundation has for years prioritized women across its entire portfolio of work, and sometimes specifically. And so we have a great partnership with CARE International, which is to reach 5 million women farmers and their communities. And this focus on women, whether it's in our programs for access for nutritious foods, we have a focus on women there. Safe water access, we know women are the water bearers and bear the burden of carrying water for distribution essentially around the world. And so we focus on women there, and even in economic opportunity. So the 3 pillars of our work, women are integral to every aspect of the work that we do around the world.
Anybody else would like to weigh in on that? My next question with my last minute and a half is really a general question, which is, what can Congress do to better help here in the area of enabling USAID to work with new organizations, smaller organizations, and local organizations in very specific terms? Perhaps Ms. Ali first.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to, as I've said, we need to examine the legislative kind of support that can be given to USAID and to incentivize them. There are certain barriers that they have, some compliance, some real barriers. I think earlier there was a question around innovative ways to move capital to more local organizations. One of the things we've been advocating for many years is to establish national funds. And the importance of that is because USAID staff are overworked and understaffed, so they want to write big checks, and that's why they like the $45, $50, $100 million RFPs. But if they establish national funds that are led by civil society in the country that have maybe a humanitarian window, an education window, a human rights window, whatever it may be, they can pool their money into that fund with other donors. And that allows them to have a greater reach of local organizations. So instead of having layers of intermediaries, you have one intermediary, which is at a national level led by civil society. So I think helping USAID to establish different kinds of mechanisms to move money would be really, really important.
Thank you, and I've run out of time, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And that concludes our questions for our witnesses today. And I want to say thank you to each of our witnesses, also our members who asked questions. To our witnesses, thank you for lending your expertise on this issue and your experiences as we move in the direction of more locally led development. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.